Hello, good afternoon and good morning. My name is Matt Welker. I'm a member of the Sustainability and Resilience team at AI's National Office in Washington, D.C. I am joined today by Paola Capo, another colleague on the team. She's fielding the Q&A and chat box, so if, as you go through the presentation, you have any questions or comments, drop them in there. She may be able to directly answer them, or we'll save them for the Q&A at the end. Bit of housekeeping, we will make a post of this presentation as well as the other two versions of this presentation from earlier this fall available on our online Basecamp peer-to-peer network for 2030 signatories. If you're not a member of that, reach out either in the chat box or to 2030commitment@ai.org and we will add you. And so that way you'll be able to reference this on demand. I'll also share, I'm going to try and go a little bit quicker today than I have in the last two versions of this presentation. The first part will cover the same content. So if you've been with us before, this will be old hat, but definitely be able to sort of customize as we get into the demonstration. If we're not able to answer your question today, we will individually follow up with you following the webinar. So don't be shy about asking those questions, including some that are maybe a little bit more specific. So with that, I wanted to make sure that everybody is aware that the 2030 by the Numbers report for 2019 is available on AI.org. We had a record 27 companies who met or exceeded the 70% predicted energy use intensity reduction target in 2019, which is absolutely tremendous. We also saw record numbers in terms of reporting and overall PEY performance. So definitely check that out and see what you and your colleagues are achieving in our journey toward a carbon neutral future. In terms of what we're going to cover today, again, this is old hat for folks who have joined us earlier this fall for the first or second version of this webinar. But we're going to walk through what is the 2030 commitment. This is important because we do have some new folks on the phone or on the webinar today. Second, we'll talk about what is the Design Data Exchange. And then third, we'll talk about the changes that happened in our 2020 update before finally demonstrating how to add a project in the DDX and taking some of your questions and trying to field them live within the tool. So what is the 2030 commitment? The 2030 commitment seeks to transform the practice of architecture in a way that is holistic, firm-wide, project-based, and data-driven. It is a direct response to Architecture 2030's 2006 2030 challenge, which outlined these progressively more challenging targets to bring major renovations and new construction to carbon neutral by 2030. We follow these targets. They definitely get a lot of attention when we think about the program, but one of the most important aspects of the program is really the transformation that firms go through, either in their governance or their design processes, or even how they think about their data in order to be moving toward a model of accountability toward climate action. Joining the program involves 5 steps. These steps really span, though, your first 3 years of the program, so a little bit daunting. High level, once you decide to make the commitment and join us in our journey, you sign a letter. We have a pre-populated template available directly in the DDX and also online that you can download and have reviewed by your leadership to upload. Once you've joined, within the first 6 months, we ask new signatories to create a sustainability action plan. This is a document that outlines really what your intentions are and how you're planning to achieve the 2030 goals or whatever goals you're setting for yourself as it pertains to sustainability and climate. We are developing right now in some fairly late drafts additional guidance to make that process easier than ever, and so we're excited to roll that out in the next few months. Third is the hard sort of internal work, and that's endeavoring to meet the 2030 targets across your portfolio. We're really interested in seeing those achievements and that application of the Sustainability Action Plan across all of your projects and not just the select few that may be pursuing a green building certification or similar. Fourth is reporting all projects into the DDX. This is at minimum an annual process, but we encourage signatories to use the tool more often and stay on top of reporting. We'll talk more about that. And then finally, every 3 years, we encourage signatories to revisit their sustainability action plan, recognizing that times change, technology changes, Your firm's culture may even change in that time, and just being able to revisit it and stay on top of your own goals and your own progress. Like I mentioned, today we're really going to focus on that fourth part of the puzzle, reporting the projects in the DDX. So what is the DDX, or the Design Data Exchange? Well, the Design Data Exchange at its simplest facilitates reporting to the AIA's 2030 commitment. That's the sort of basic level. There's always been a reporting component of the program going back to when the program started in 2009. There was a spreadsheet. It was an Excel spreadsheet that folks would send out to their teams, populate data, return to AIA, and it was challenging and difficult to use. And so moving ahead into 2015, working with DOE, Autodesk, EPA, and others, we moved that spreadsheet into an online database, which became known as the Design Data Exchange. And that tool was practical for a while. It was fairly straightforward and followed a lot of the same mechanics of the spreadsheet. And then this year, earlier this fall, we updated the DDX into the new 2030 DDX, which is intended to make it easier than ever for project architects and smaller firms to enter their data, manage their data, and understand how it's performing against their peers or their own portfolio. Things that are important to know about the tool is that it is entirely cloud-based and is a secure project reporting and benchmarking tool for your firm. You can access it on any device at any time. There's no downloading or installation. Everything lives in the cloud. Secondly, the key relationship happens through a company link. And so that's an important sort of nuance I want to acknowledge. While you create an individual account and individually work on projects, those projects are all associated with your firm record, and your firm or company record is associated with your signatory status, because the 2030 commitment at the end of the day is about firm transformation, company transformation, and not just individual performance. Third, the tool allows you to track project data through design, construction, and operations. Primarily, the 2030 commitment in terms of our goals and targets really emphasize that design phase data. However, we do support tracking operational data through the life of the project, so you can understand how is the project performing against how it was designed. And then finally, the critical piece, but also in some ways the least important piece, is that it does facilitate reporting to the 2030 commitment and meeting that requirement of the program. There are, at the top level, two types of permissions. Again, the core relationship in the DDX is through your firm or company, and there are company level permissions. And then there are also project level permissions that are more detailed and let you calibrate your access based on a specific project. Is it one that you're actively working on? Is it one that your company is working on but you don't touch? So at the firm level, there are two types. There is an administrator and an employee. These are important to understand, specifically because when you create an account for the first time, if you're also creating your firm's record or your company's record, you will by default be the administrator. So employees are able to add, edit, delete any project through the DDX that belongs to their firm. They are able to add or edit collaborators to any project, so they can say, you know, hey, Paula, you're on my project team, but this is one you're keeping an eye on. I'm going to add you as a collaborator. They can also export project data to view it and do internal analyses with as appropriate to your company. And they're able to view both the Sustainability Action Plan and 2030 Commitment Letter, making those visible to all members of your firm is an important way of demonstrating visibility and accountability. On the administrator side, they can do all of the same things, but they also have the ability to edit that information. They can edit the Sustainability Action Plan, they can edit the 2030 Commitment Letter, and they can also manage individual employees, office studios, and the annual portfolio submission process through their end. The other unique feature for administrators, they have the ability to bulk import and use API to add projects to the Design Data Exchange. We'll talk a little bit more about those different pathways, but it's important to note that the employees are able to add and edit individual projects. The administrator has the ability to do some more bulk management. So what's changed? What's different about the tool that we launched just a few weeks ago? Well, for starters, we retired a few features. For the most part, these are features that either caused confusion, didn't work as expected, we got a lot of feedback from you all, or just weren't useful. And so those include the HVAC tab, the building envelope tab, the research scatter plot tab, and the ability to track monthly fuel source data for your operational energy. Again, you can still track operational energy, just collects it at a yearly window. We've also retired a few of the less commonly used fields. These were optional fields, including asking about if energy use would be collected, if daylight sensors were included, and some information about target certifications, which continue to change and evolve in the marketplace. At the same time, we've been able to introduce a variety of new features. I'm going to walk through each of these individually through the slides, and then we'll see many of them in action when we get to the demo. But the sort of key one is a revamped user experience. And again, we are very much trying to target making the tool easier to use for project architects and smaller firms, and specifically individuals who may not be the sustainability experts within your organization. The 2030 commitment at its core, we believe, is approachable and should be accessible and really needs a large number of stakeholders engaged in order to achieve the goals that we hope to see. So we do hope that the revamped user experience makes that easier than ever, although we know change can be difficult at first. We've introduced a 3 dashboard system. You have a personal view, a company view, and project views. We'll talk more about those. We've added the ability to add individual collaborators. So this is a way to tag yourself to a project. So if you're, one person in a firm of, 40, and you don't want to see everybody's projects, you only want to see the ones you're touching, you can add yourself as a collaborator, and that'll customize your personal view. You can also reach out to an engineer or somebody outside your firm who's working as a consultant and add them to the process for them to collect their data. One thing we hear over and over again is that oftentimes you have to go to an engineer, an energy modeling consultant to get the information you need. Hopefully this streamlines it a little bit. We've also added real-time insight tiles, again, helping you compare, simplified the project setup. It's now 3 steps, so you can save and continue. You don't need all of your information right out the gate. Added workflows for both offsite renewables and embodied carbon for the first time, and streamlined the reporting process from a complicated 2-step process that left many portfolios uncounted to hopefully a simpler process that makes it easier than ever to participate in the annual reporting cycle. So in terms of what that looks like, this is the new landing page. This page will be updated over time with additional information and resources, but it's where you go either to log in or to create an account for the first time as an individual. For users who had accounts in the previous DDX but have not yet logged into the new tool, the first time you log in, you will need to select forgot your password. Well, we migrated information. We did not migrate passwords for data protection. So again, if you're accessing the tool for the first time, you will need to select forgot your password and follow those prompts. Once you get inside the DDX, again, there are 3 types of dashboards. The first is the portfolio dashboard. This is your default view. And this is going to help you manage your individual account information, your name, your email, the company you're associated with, and also let you see just the projects you're working on. So again, if you're a project architect and you're working on a handful of projects while your company is working on 3 handfuls of projects, you can add yourself so that you just see the ones that you're responsible for adding information to or keeping an eye on. Intentionally, this is intended to be great and practical for project team members, and again, those who are maybe less interested in the overall performance of the firm and more interested in the individual performance of their projects. The second dashboard is the company dashboard. This is where you will manage your company employees and locations if you are an administrator. For every user, it's where you can go to see all of the company's projects. So not just the ones you're working on, but every project that's being touched and advanced by your firm. And it's intended to be the most useful resource for 2030 power users and company admins. And in many ways, it's most analogous to the old homepage for those who are familiar with the old tool, and can in some instances be a bit overwhelming. The third type of dashboard is the project level dashboard. So as soon as you create the basic level of information for a project, its name, its location, its climate zone, we are creating a unique project dashboard where you will record all of your project performance data from design to operations. It has those insight tiles available to help you understand how your project is comparing to other similar projects throughout the DDX, as well as projects within your firm. And it's where you can go to manage the personnel working on the project, those collaborators or project team notes. So what does collaborators look like? Obviously, this is a new feature. The individual collaborators is intended to let you add both internal and external individuals to projects, to customize their level of permissions, and to add it to their personal dashboard. Adding users is fairly easy. You can look up or invite any colleague who's already registered within the DDX, or you can send an invitation for them to join, and when they go through that workflow, they'll automatically be added to the project. When you invite them, you're able to determine if they have edit or read-only permissions. So in the case of a read-only, perhaps you're adding a client who's interested in seeing the data, but you don't want accidentally changing any of the figures. That's an example where you might use it. And again, it just gives you more flexibility to maintain your data. Real-time insight tiles exist throughout the DDX. This is a feature that we especially welcome feedback and input on. We want to make sure that these are meaningful to you and that they're putting data visualization where you need it to think about your portfolio and your projects. These are showing the ones on the project dashboard. They're particularly some of my favorite. And they, again, help you understand both how your project is performing against others in the DDX, as well as how the project is performing over time against the 2030 target. We know, especially for folks who maybe don't have that deep sustainability background, that when we say, you know, a PEUI reduction or even a predicted energy use intensity value, or even talk about PEUI in general, sometimes that can be a little bit of a turnoff. And so hopefully this makes it a little bit easier to say, is what I am accomplishing good or less good? And understand that fairly quickly to identify top performers within your projects and your portfolio. In terms of setting up a project, I mentioned this before, it is now divided into 3 work phases. This is a place where we got a lot of feedback for on the old DDX. This is a feature that a lot of people asked for. You can now set up a project before you know all of the details. Maybe you don't know what the use types are. Maybe you haven't, you know, calculated or determined your predicted energy use intensity. That's okay. You can go ahead and create the shell of the record with as little information as the name, location, climate zone, and the units that you'll be specifying, whether it's imperial or metric. And then from there, you can continue to add extended project information. This is your use types. This is construction costs if you know it. This is your energy code, and this is your baseline, which again pulls automatically from Zero Tool or the US national average, consistent with the methodology that was available in the previous iteration of the tool. And then the final screen helps you set your target. So by default, the target is the 2030 target, which for new construction is 80% this year for whole buildings, and for interior only projects is a 25% reduction in PLPD. It auto sort of populates that target that you're working toward, but you can customize it if you know for some reason that you want to be more ambitious with your project, or that everything's stacked against you. It's not quite going to achieve that mark, but you want to set an ambitious target within your own practice. On that third page, at the bottom, there is also a chart that I want to call attention to. It is a box and whiskers chart, and it is showing the range of projects that are already in the DDX from all users, from all companies, from all periods, that have the same use type as your project, so you can see the range of that data. And we think that's important because it helps understand, you know, maybe I can't achieve the 80% PEUI reduction on this hospital facility, but I can see that others are reaching 90, 92, 93. So maybe I want to set my goal, you know, somewhere in the middle, so to make a best guess. Again, it's a feature that we hope to continue to improve to make more useful for you in your decision making. So next up, I'm going to talk about the offsite renewables workflow. For the first time, we are allowing 2030 signatories to include offsite renewables into their PEUI calculation, provided that it meets a few requirements. The first is that it must not be an interior only project. It must be a whole building residential or non-residential project, so tracking PEUI. Second, it must be energy modeled. And third, you must report individual fuel sources. And actually, since we've launched this feature, I've heard from a number of users that this actually makes it easier than ever because it's easier to find or collect the fuel sources in some instances than to do the math to get back to a simple PEUI value. So that's been great to hear. The reason it's important that fuel sources are being reported is that for the last 10 years of the program, all of our baselines and comparisons have been only considering on-site, while we want off-sites to start being included as we move toward carbon neutral. We want to make sure that the data sets are comparable, and that's why the fuel sources are required. The next workflow that we've added is embodied carbon. We've worked with a number of experts and leaders around the country. It's a place where we'll continue to make improvements, and it is a completely optional field. You are not required or expected as a 2030 signatory to enter embodied carbon. It is not part of the challenge thresholds. However, we do think it's important in understanding the whole carbon picture of your buildings and really the impact you're having. It defaults the values to a 60-year period, although you can customize that. There are a number of tools pre-populated in the dropdown that you can use to indicate where you're pulling your data from. And you are required to specify the scope and LCA stages that are included again so that we can make comparisons and analyze the data and then empower you all as we move forward to say, what does this number mean, and is it comparing better or worse than other similar projects and buildings? And so we are hoping that we see some good uptake on that and can start introducing more of the feedback mechanisms in next build cycles. Next up is the streamlined reporting process. So as I mentioned before, it was a 2+ step process previously. For every reporting period, you had to create a record for your project. You then had to submit your project, and then you had to submit your entire portfolio. In the new DDX, any project that is active will automatically roll forward. So if you had a project that was updated at the end of 2019, but hasn't had any design changes in 2020, but that work is still on your board, you don't need to duplicate that record like you did previously. It'll simply sort of pull that information in and process that it's part of your 2020 reporting year. We've also, through the simplified, streamlined reporting process, introduced the concept of reporting badges, which will display how many years you've reported. And these are downloadable, I believe, PNG files that you can use on your website, on social media, on marketing, when submitting for awards, sort of any number of varieties. And again, this is a feature that we were asked for and are excited to be able to introduce in this new launch. Finally, before we get into the demo, I wanted to touch on the 3 different ways of adding information to the DDX. These are consistent with what we had in the previous tool, but I think that there's often a lot of sort of confusion about, well, what's the best way for me to do it? And the answer is they're all great. Direct input is particularly good for folks who have a smaller number of projects that are being entered, or for folks who are, again, maybe less adept with certain sustainability concepts, less sure of what the numbers are, because there are more checks and balances and feedback mechanisms in place. It gives you a really high degree of control over your data and lets you easily manage and customize team permissions. And with the enhancements we've made, especially if your projects aren't energy modeled, if you're not tracking embodied carbon, it's easier and faster than ever to get them through the reporting process. The second method is the bulk upload. This is particularly great for firms who already have in-house databases that they're using to track their projects, especially if you've aligned some of the fields with core DDX requirements. And it allows you to upload hundreds, really thousands of projects very quickly if you meet the formatting guidelines. We are publishing updated guidance for the 2020 reporting period in just a few weeks. It's with technical review right now. And so again, hopefully that makes that feature easier than ever for those who use it. And then finally, you can connect via a handful of energy modeling software tools, which are great for people who are consistently energy modeling their projects. And that way you can do your work in there and it automatically takes care of the sort of DDX side of the equation. All three get the job done. It really comes down to sort of personal preference and your firm's culture. So I'm going to go ahead and queue up the DDX on my screen. We'll be doing a live demo. In the meantime, please go ahead and drop questions in Paola's chat box, and we'll make sure that we get to those. And I will have this queued up in just one moment. All right, so folks should now be seeing the DDX and the login page. I'm going to be using our 2030 tester account. So you're going to see that my username and password is entered. Once I log in, I land on the personal dashboard, right? So in this case, my username happens to be AIA, a little bit confusing, but this is my personal view. And so I can see my individual account information that I can easily edit, as well as the specific projects that I'm on. One note, quickly, if you are the person who creates a project for the first time, it will automatically appear on your personal dashboard. You're automatically associated with the project as a collaborator. So again, just something to save you a couple of steps if you're the person who creates the account. To go to the company dashboard, you go up to the sub-navigation, click on company. You'll see that our company name here is Acme View Architects. And we have information including our signatory status, and that you can see and edit our sustainability action plan. Again, you can see the managed projects. This features all of the projects that the firm has throughout all time. It's also where you can go to export or import projects. And then also managing the office studio information, as well as the employee information. And then finally, information about the API, which again is for admins only. The third tab, in terms of basic navigation of the site, is the Reports tab. This is similar, and we'll continue to make enhancements here. But this just gives you some additional visualization about the performance of your portfolio and your project based on reporting date and office location. So I'm going to go back to the portfolio view. For this demo, I'm going to show adding a project. So to begin, you click on the Create a Project. We will these values are all fairly similar to what you saw in the previous DDX for those who are familiar with it. All right. Important to note, one of the new features is that you can specify whether it's an inch pound or in international standard. By default, I'm going to go with inch pound, which is going to look most familiar to folks on their previous record. At this point, at step 1 of 3, once I click Save and Continue, that is the minimum amount of information that's required to set up a project in the DDX. A project that only has this level of information will not count toward your reporting overall performance. You have to have performance data in order for it to count toward your goal. But you can go ahead and create that basic template record just by clicking Save and Continue. At this point, you can either save and come back later, or continuing entering information, which is what I'm going to do today. All right. So entering occupancy year and energy code, there's some additional fields that are completely optional. We're going to add our use type, which here is going to be a small office building. It will auto sum if you add multiple use types. It'll keep adding to the total, and the baselines will automatically pull from ZeroTool, assuming your project is in the US or Canada. Then the final step on this screen is to select your baseline. So by default in green, we do refer to the ZeroTool baseline, which is using CBEX 2003 data. If you have an alternate baseline, you can use that by selecting Use Custom, entering your value, and then entering your source, which could be an internal database, or it could be, for the case of like a laboratory facility, Labs 21, where you're going to get a more nuanced value. I'm going to go ahead and keep our ZeroTool baseline and select Save and Continue. Again, this brings us to page 3, but again, you can save and come back later. You don't have to complete all of this information at the same time, but you get to set your target. By default, we adopt the 80% target for 2030 projects. I'm going to go ahead and use that and say select default target, but you could also select your own. So again, if you know that your project is going to go for like net zero, you can go ahead and say that your target is 0. It is 100% reduction, and that would be fine too. And then finally here at the bottom is that chart. So this one is automatically filtered to small office buildings. It's matching the use types available in my building. And it's also showing for all climate zones. You can see my code equivalency. The code I selected has a 49% estimated reduction. The 2030 target's out here at 80. You can see the office buildings have a pretty wide range. You can also toggle on other facilities if you wanted to see that information. If you were considering what a restaurant cafeteria looks like in the project, you can also see the range of that project, and you can select multiple at the same time. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click Save and View. So at this point, the project has been set up. It will not count toward overall project performance because we haven't added any design data, but we have added all of the basic things to create a record within your system. And that's what this warning up here is showing, that track design data is not complete. It's just saying we haven't added any project data. So now we are on the project dashboard. This is, again, where you're going to see how the project compares to others, how it compares to goals, how it compares to your baseline, and be able to edit or modify any of the information that we've already adjusted by clicking on the pencil icons throughout the page. You'll see that AI Tester 1, which again is my official name in this system, which I should really change. By default, I've been added as a collaborator, but I could go ahead and add Paula Capo as a collaborator, calling her out. So as I enter her name, it automatically is going to pull up. These are any users within the DDX, because again, you can add collaborators from external firms, for example, an energy modeling consultant or engineer. If there was somebody who was not added, so we'll say Katie Couric. Katie Couric is not in the DDX, unsurprisingly. And so we can go ahead and select try invite, in which case you populate first name, last name, and the permission. So in this case, we'll say that she can do read only, and invite to collaborate. And that's going to shoot off an email to her at that account. And when she clicks on that and follows through the steps, it'll automatically appear on her personal dashboard. If you make a mistake, if you send it out to the wrong person, if that's not a thing you want to do, at any point you can come back and just click the trash can, and that'll revoke the permission. So if she clicks on the links in the email, it won't actually yield the desired result. She won't be able to access your project. It'll remain safe. So let's talk about adding design data. You can either add design data by clicking on this gray track design data button under design phase, or up here at the top in the green tile where it says track data. We'll go and click on that. And this is your basic worksheet. It by default goes to the first reporting phase or the first reporting phase after the most recent one. So because we've never reported data, it thinks we're starting at concept. Later, you'll see that it automatically will advance to schematic design. So I'm going to go ahead and backdate this. Say that we did our schematic back in October of last year. If you have no additional information, if you have not project or energy modeled your tool, if you have not calculated your embodied carbon, if you do not know or care about your window to wall ratio, to add the project data and have it count toward your 2030 portfolio, all you need to do is enter the reporting phase, the reporting date, and hit save and go to project dashboard. It's that simple. If you're not energy modeling, but you want to be counting your projects and tracking them and participating in the program, it's simply adding that information, making a date of when it was in the design phase and clicking go. What that does is it goes ahead and it plots a value. This is using code equivalency calculations provided by the New Buildings Institute to provide an estimate. So that's what's showing for this project, and also to plot it on this progress towards goal chart. So let's go ahead and say that we want to add another design phase. When I click track design, it automatically advances to schematic design and the reporting date defaults to today. Again, I'm going to go and backdate that. We're creating some retroactive data here. We'll say back in February, we did an energy model. And so you can toggle that on to say yes, that there was an energy model. We used Autodesk, the architecture team did it. And then you can either enter your predicted EUI, which is what we'll do now. We can say 40, or you can enter your fuel source split. So that's what this toggle is. It's saying, do you want to split out your fuel sources? And if you say no, you can enter your basic PEY value that you already have. And if you enter yes, you can add your specific fuel sources. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we'll add some grid electricity, kilowatt hours, gas, and therms. What else? I guess we can do some on-site. Do 1500, sure. Also in kilowatt hours, and it's going to do the math over here to calculate your predicted PE or predicted EUI for you. And so this 29.96 value is the one that'll count toward your project. Scrolling down, because we said we have offsite, by default, it's popping up this toggle and saying, well, tell us more about your offsite, or tell us more about your renewable energy options. So you could specify that you use photovoltaic or wind turbine. These are all optional fields in all situations. And so if you don't know that information, you can just click no and not track it. I'm going to go ahead and track that we had photovoltaic to get that 1500 on site. Additionally, from this workflow, you have the opportunity to add your predicted lighting power density. This is not required for whole building projects. Your embodied carbon, this is not required for any project. And additional inputs, including window to wall ratio, your ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G baseline energy model, if you want to track that. I don't, so I'm going to go ahead and click save and go back to dashboard. And you'll see that this project has bumped up to 52% from the 49% we were at before. And you can see a slight improvement here in the trajectory. And the design phases are individually recorded down here, so you can review those. If you wanted to edit that information, you could by clicking on these three dots and selecting edit. It's pulling up all of the information from that 2-4 design phase. So maybe we want to go back and say, you know what, we actually do want to track embodied carbon. So I'm going to click yes. I'm going to add a value, 50,000. Specify your scope and LCA stages. Hit save and go back to project model. And so now that information has been added. So one last piece on sort of design phase data. If we go in and add a third design phase, this one's for design development. We'll say we knocked it out maybe a month ago. We haven't run an energy model again, so I'm going to select no, but it's going to pull in all of the information from before. That is all saved to the project. So while we didn't run the energy model, again, we're assuming that that's still the value for the project. So when I select save and go back to dashboard, it'll plot a second dot at that same PEY value. We're assuming that we're trying to track that when did the energy model happen, when did you calculate embodied carbon, but assuming that that's rolling forward as part of the design. And you only really need to update it if your design performance has changed. One other note here, and then I think we can take some questions, is the active, on hold, complete, and canceled status chips at the top. These are slightly different and new. For those of you who are very familiar with the old DDX, you'll recall that on hold and project closeout final were design phases. In the new DDX, those are status chips. And if the project is marked as on hold or canceled, we'll remove it from ongoing calculations. It won't roll forward and count toward your annual reporting. And you can always toggle back between any of these. So if the project goes on hold, we're hearing about a lot of like commercial projects going on hold right now because of coronavirus. You can mark it as on hold, but always come back to either say it's canceled or active and easily sort of toggle between those. To mark a project complete, that means the project has been built, construction, at least through CA. And that option is only available after your project goes through construction administration. So the last thing is submitting the portfolio. So again, this is something only the administrator can do from the company dashboard. Click on this gray button that says Submit Portfolio. Select your reporting year. So we'll say 2020. I'm getting a flag that I've already submitted it. That's okay. We can always resubmit. So I'm going to hit Continue. And it's pulling in the 26 active projects that I have, even though they have not been, regardless of whether they've been edited this year or not. I'm going to select that I confirm the snapshot reflects my full design portfolio for 2020. We realize that that's not always true in every case. Really what I'm looking for is that you're not cherry picking your projects and only submitting your best, but every firm makes some determination when they go through their sustainability action plan of what the threshold for reporting will be, whether it's by square footage or scope. And then there's an optional field, which is to give to consent for us to publish your data. Again, AIA takes your privacy really seriously. We will not disclose individual project performance or your company's overall performance without express permission. And so this is a field where if you want to go ahead and grant that, you can. It's something that, again, some firms have already asked for. But again, it's completely optional, unlike that first box, which is agreeing that this is your full portfolio. When you select Submit, it brings you to this page where you can download the 2030 badge, marking how many years you've returned or reported, or you can return to your portfolio and continue to look at your work.
So with that, Matt, will there be an updated batch import guide published based on these DDX changes?
Absolutely, that's a great question. That one is a little bit behind schedule. We are working on it now. The estimated release is the second week of November. And it's one place where I do want to highlight, we've received a lot of feedback on the batch import, so we are hoping that the new guide can solve some of those challenges in the past, but we're looking forward to have an updated PDF version of the batch import guide the second week of November. The existing guide will get you probably 90% of the way there in the interim.
Awesome. And we had a question about that box and whisker graph that you showed us. If someone wanted to go back, like a project that was submitted in the old DDX, can they still see this box and whisker graph, and how do they get to it?
Yeah, so we'll go in. We'll use that project from before. So I should probably tell you what I'm doing instead of just doing it. Sorry about that. So I went in here and I first searched by the project name, which was 304 Fairview. Again, here in the project manager, you can see a little bit more information by clicking through on it. But if you click these three dots throughout the site, the three dots indicate that you can take an action. The actions do vary from location to location, but if you click on those three dots and click Edit Project, it'll take you back into the three-step workflow. You can just click save and continue until that third page, and it will take you back to that chart. And one thing to note about that chart, because I didn't spend a lot of time on it, and I'm sorry about that. By default, it's going to select whatever use types you've specified for your project, and it's going to pull from all climate zones by default. But if, for example, you were like, okay, well, what would happen if we took this office project and added a small supermarket to it, for example? It won't merge them together because we're not like calibrating sort of based on square footage, but it will break it apart and you can see where supermarkets are performing and where the office retail is performing. And then you could use some of that information to come up with a best guess for yourself to set your target, assuming you don't want to go with that 80% default from the 2030 commitment. But you can always go back to the box plot here anytime just by going back into and viewing or editing your project.
Great. And so we have a question around the idea of this new streamlined system with the auto advancing projects. How will the DDX handle duplicate projects submitted in a bulk import?
Yeah, so for bulk import, if you've, so if you're, in the event that you have a project that in the bulk import, you're reporting like multiple design phases for, so long as your project IDs are consistent, which is how it worked before, it will link them together and you'll have two records. And I believe it will default to the next in sequence design phase rather than date. If you have a project that's already in the DDX, so from 2018, and then you're bulk importing in 2019, additional information about that project. Again, if your project ID is the same, it's matching on project ID and firm name, and it will pull it up and link them together. If your project IDs are off, you may have some issues, and we'll definitely clarify that in the report guide, but you can always contact 2030 Commitment at ai.org, and we can help knit those together. And that may be something as well, it's worth noting, that in the data migration, you might find that that has happened where perhaps the information year to year was not quite the same. And so you might have some records that are talking about the same projects, but they're appearing as two lines instead of one line. You can either recreate the data in the user experience or contact us and we can try to troubleshoot and find a way forward. We know that because of the migration, some of those issues that were maybe less visible in the old system might be more visible now.
Great. Is it possible to download high quality graphics from that reporting page?
It's not currently available, but we do have it in the workflow queue. So we will be continuing to add new features, enhancements, and updates to the site through at least the next 12 months. That is one feature that we, in our beta period, heard a lot of feedback about and are working towards. So the ability to export that information, the ability to print, for example, your project dashboard is a thing that we've heard. And so we are exploring those, but not currently. But great feedback.
Great. So a question again related to reporting. If someone created a project in early 2021 reflecting that project's performance in 2020, will it be able to be submitted in the 2020 report?
Yeah, no, great question. In that case, what's important is that you're backdating your design phase. So again, instead of having that reporting year, we now have reporting dates, which are calendar based. You can't set a reporting date in the future, but you can set it in the past. And so if we go back into that 304 project, and we look at that information, so you saw today that I created this project. We all went through that journey together, and I backdated my dates reported to November of 2019 and June of 2020. It doesn't matter what specific day you pick. You could backdate everything to 12/31/2020, but so long as it falls within or before calendar year 2021, so by December 31st of 2020, sorry. So long as it the date is equal to or before 12/31/2020 and the project is active, it will pull in your report no matter when you actually add the data. I hope that makes sense.
Great. So if you haven't reported a project until a later phase, do you need to create a record beginning from concept design and then for each subsequent phase with different dates, or can you start at a later phase?
It's a great question. You can start at any phase.
Awesome. If a project that has multiple buildings, would those need to be reported in the DDX as separate projects? So you would have different projects per building.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it at the end of the day, it comes a little bit down to how your company wants to view and understand that data, which I realize is not a helpful answer. It is very common to see multiple buildings reported, but follow a consistent naming convention. Because that does let you get sort of a finer level sort of granularity. But if you wanted to take the sum of your project or your campus design, you could do that. I would argue that for you, that data might be a little bit less meaningful, but at the end of the day, it's your choice. You can do it either way.
So let me start with a question about the workflow on adding collaborators. So what is the intended workflow for projects with collaborators? Should just one firm set up a project and then add other team members, external and internal, as collaborators? The example would be the engineer, architect setting up the project, or would both have to have their own?
So that's a great question. I'm going to give an ungreat answer. Currently, when you add somebody as a collaborator, it gives them individual permission to edit the project and to view the project. So as a workflow, you as an architect are setting up a project, but you know that your engineer is the one who has the embodied carbon numbers and you know you want to capture those. You would add them as a collaborator to the project, and then they would be able to directly edit the number rather than like sending you an email or some such. And that's the thing that we've gotten a lot of feedback. What does not happen currently because of the collaborator function is it does not make a project appear in multiple company portfolios. So if I work at company A and I add my engineer at company B so that he can add my embodied carbon data, he will see my project, but it will not appear in his company's portfolio currently. That is something that we are working on. We know that there are a number of instances where we have 2 or more 2030 signatory firms working on the same project and entering it multiple times. We don't have that solved currently in the new DDX, but this is a step toward that. So for the collaborator function, it really is being able to determine internally who on your team should be working on the project so that they're just seeing the ones they need. And then B, being able to add engineers or consultants who might have the energy modeling information or the embodied carbon information that the design teams don't have so that they have a direct way of entering it.
Great. So the next question is about that reporting year. There are a couple of questions on that, but let's start with currently the view of our company project list does not show reporting year. How do I organize and see projects by reporting year?
Yeah, it's a great question. The best way to get at the information currently would be to filter by if the project is active, and then do it as an export. It is a thing we are working on actively. There's not a great straightforward answer. And part of that is because we have made this transition from reporting year where you enter the same project every year to having an ongoing live database of your project. So right now, the best way to do that is to export your project data or to filter by active. But we are actively working on solutions to improve that. It's a lot of feedback we got on our first call as well.
And then could you just confirm that as long as a project is active, it will roll over for the next year? That's a question we got several times.
Yes, 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 yes. That is absolutely going to happen if the project is active. The logic that the logic that's used to pull your portfolio submission for the reporting year, which I demoed that 3-step process, is that it's pulling any active project and it is pulling the date reported up to 12/31 of that reporting year of 2020. So for example, if I added a project in 2019 that was in concept and I entered that information, and then in February of next year, I added information about design development in the year, I confused myself. If I created a record for concept in 2019, and then I added in February of 2020, the next design phase, when you submit the 2019 portfolio, it would show the performance of the project as of the concept phase in 12/31, because that's the last date reported prior to the deadline. And the deadline, even though we submit on March 31st, the deadline is a calendar year.
Great, so we have a question around bulk upload. For those who do use bulk upload, have the fields changed for the spreadsheet, and what does that entail? What do those changes entail?
Yeah, for the most part, the spreadsheet is consistent with what it was previously. We have added the additional optional fields around embodied carbon. I do encourage folks who use the bulk import to download a copy of the spreadsheet from the DDX as they prepare to pull that together, just as you would in any other year. There is additional updated guidance that hopefully is more straightforward, streamlined, and has solved some of the peccadillos of the old system that should be available within the next month or so.
Great, and so we have a couple of questions around the collaborator. I want to start with a question about API being limited in its usability because of only allowing admins to be able to use it. What are the limitations there, since API can only be used by admin?
So for a project, if you, within a project, as basic firm level permissions, anybody within the firm has the ability by default to edit any company project, and they can view them on the company page. So if you are within a company, but you haven't been added as a collaborator, but you do have permission to use API, you could update it with the API. The collaborator internally is really about populating the portfolio page and just making it clear about what you need to be working on, and then allowing you to dial up or down permissions. The API being only available to admin is also something we can look at revising that guidance and making that available to all users if that's helpful. And for that, we'd love confirmation both in this chat or by emailing 2030commitment@ai.org. or by dropping it in the feedback within the app. There are a lot of ways to give us feedback, and we're very much interested in all of them. Throughout the DDX, though, it's not showing up on my screen right now, but there is a red floating box that also prompts you for feedback. And if you submit things there, then we'll see them at any time as you're using it. So within a firm, it should not interrupt it in terms of the API. And then if making that API ability available to all users, all employee users is helpful, we can look at revising that.
Great. We had several people who maybe haven't or thought this was very helpful, but they haven't created an account yet. And so there were questions about how do you create an initial account. And Matt, if you want to walk through that at all, you're welcome to, but I did want to share that we have help videos on our YouTube page. So you guys can head over there and watch how to set up a new account, how to create a new just a new user profile, just general navigating the DDX and things like that.
So I'm going to attempt to create a new account. It's fickle because I don't have a unique email, but I'll try. Oops, sorry. I got off to the wrong start. So when you log in at the top, the first time you come to the page, you can create an account. The first step is to create an individual account, and the individual account is your personal information, your name, your email address, and your password. By default, you won't be linked to a company. I'm going to try and trick the system with that classic period trick. Oops, it'd be helpful if I type my name. And then accept the terms and conditions. Okay, it's not going to accept my email because it looks just like my personal email, which is already added. Let me try something else.
I've also added the link to the YouTube video in the questions pod, so you all should be able to see that.
Okay. So when you create your account and it's successful, it will send you an email, which you'll need to click through to verify that your account works. I am going to hop to another browser and quickly try to do that. Again, those help page videos that Paula has referenced are excellent. So when you get an email, it's basically going to say, please confirm your email address, and there's a link. So we'll click on that. Right. And then, okay, so then we should be in a little bit fickle because of the demo. It's much easier when you're able to use the same browser. But anyway, we'll go ahead and go in. We said it was 2030 test. I don't know that I'm going to be able to demo it today, but what you would do is go ahead and having created it by that create your account, fill out that information, click accept terms and conditions, select create profile, and then confirm with your email. And I'm having issues because I'm using that fake email address. And then it'll bring you back to the page. When you log in, this page will be, this box won't have a company added. There'll be a prompt to add your company. And when you do that, when you add your company, it will bring you to a page not totally dissimilar to this, but where you can search for a company. Then I can either identify your company. So if like your firm is already in here, by searching either by name or email or a website address, it'll populate it and you can request to join. And then one of your firm administrators will receive an email prompting you to be accepted. If you don't hear back, you might want to follow up with them in person. And if you're not sure who that is, you can absolutely email 2030commitmentai.org. But the firm administrator does need to approve your request to join. If your company has not already joined the DDX, then you can at that point create a company, and you will by default be the administrator, and it'll just take you through another form of how large is your company, what is at least one of your offices. You'll complete that information and you'll be able to use the tool, but that doesn't commit you to the program. It just gets you inside. And again, Paula's videos that she dropped in the help are excellent and show that process uninterrupted, which I'm sorry I couldn't demo for you all today. The multi-browser got the better of me, so I apologize.
No problem. So we have easier demos now. We have how do you add or invite an employee onto your company page? And similarly, how does someone become an administrator?
Great. So by default, whoever creates the company record is the administrator. One thing to note there as well, when you do search for a company, I encourage you to try the company a couple of different ways. So if you worked for Welker and Capo, but sometimes you do business as WWC, search by WWC and Welker. And that'll, because sometimes depending on how the person who set up the account set it up, that'll be the trigger. But for the most part, we should catch those. So by default, whoever creates the company is the administrator. Once you are the administrator, and maybe it's just because you were first in the door, but you have no sort of responsibility or authority within your organization, you can add a new employee, and then anyone who is an administrator at any time can switch people from administrator to employee by just changing the toggle like I'm doing now. And then that person gets an email notifying them of their permission. If you want to add a user, an employee, I'm going to add a resilience team, which is resilience@ai.org if you ever have any questions about resilience and adaptation. And when you invite them for the first time, you can specify whether they'll be an administrator or an employee. We'll keep them as an employee. And they received an email inviting them to join the firm. So I just got that notification across the top that said they've been invited. They also appear here highlighted in the faint yellow that they have been added and what their permission is. And that's waiting for them to click the link and sort of confirm the handshake that they want to be part of the DDX. From that link, they'll be required to set up their personal password, but they'll automatically be linked to your company because you've already invited them. If for some reason time goes by, they haven't joined, you can click on the 3-dot icon and click resend. Or if it was an accident, you didn't mean to do it, you can also click delete and it'll remove that. And if they do click that email link, the handshake won't be successful and they won't be added to your company. So adding an employee is that easy. You just go up to the box under employees on the company tab and click add employee, and then search by email. One note on that actually, and Paula, I'm sure we have other questions, but oh, no, never mind. Again, a little fickle because I'm using all emails that are already linked to other accounts. But yep, yeah, adding your employee should be that easy. Other questions?
Great, yes, too many questions. I think there are some duplicate questions that I think we can answer through the peer-to-peer Basecamp, so everyone can see them instead of messaging only the person who sent it. So I'll make sure to set that up within the next couple of days to get those answers. But we do have a question. We've had a couple of questions on what used to be the scatter plot. So can we have more details about reporting and output? And if we've gotten rid of the scatter plot, what has come to help with that data visualization?
It's a great question. So the primary place where that's visible is within the project setup, which you can go back to at any point. From user testing and feedback we received, the primary function of the scatter plot was helping to determine a target. Oops. Helping to determine a target, and so that's been introduced in the target phase so that you can see the visualization. And again, it's using, it's showing ranges but not counts. So for the scatter plot, the first bar going to the left shows the bottom 25% of projects. The first green bar to the white edge shows the second 25% of projects as a median. The third is the next quarter of projects, and then finally this is showing the last 25% of projects. So it's not quite as detailed, but that's one way that it's visualized. We are looking at other ways to continue to increase that visualization. And one place you do see some of that is within the reports tab, where you can view your firm's performance and the breakdown. So we've kept that reports tab feature. Again, I think if there are really specific ways that you're using that information or want to be using that information, we definitely want to hear it. One of the upsides of replatforming the DDX and bringing it into this sort of new update is that it allows additional flexibility on the back end to support and roll out iterations and improvements. We have a number of features slated to be added to the tool over the next year or so, but are constantly adjusting those based on your guys' feedback. So I really encourage you to share that, obviously, in the chat. We'll review that, and as well as 2030 commitment at AIA.org. We have a team of people who monitor the inbox and are always looking for ways to improve the tool for you.
Great. And then I think we maybe have time for one more quick question. Is there a procedure for reporting backlog of completed projects for past years? So for example, if their firm reporting has lagged due to admin change, or they just wanted to add more projects from before they joined the commitment, how can they gear up to catch up their account?
Yeah, the best way to do that is to go ahead and, if it's creating a new project, to go ahead and create the project like you would. And then after you enter all the basic project information, sorry, I'm a little scattered. After you enter that basic project information, under track data, go in and add those phases and just make sure that the date reported corresponds to the year that you're interested in populating for. But again, because we have this new like rolling system, you know, if the only thing you do is put in the most recent date, that's progress, and that's okay. It'll at least show up in your next one. But that's how you would do it. You would just backdate so that the date reported for your phase is in the year you want it to correspond to.
The first question we got today was, what sort of projects do firms enter into the DDX? Is it only projects that have a new HVAC system, or can you put in even a small renovation such as a kitchen?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's sort of the question that each firm has to decide for themselves when they go through the sustainability action plan. I think what you're looking for is that the scope of your design work is significant enough that it can change the energy performance or the lighting power density of your project. So if you're if the addition of like a kitchen or of a couple of rooms to like a private single family residential, at that same time you're looking at your whole systems, you may want to enter that, and you may say, you know what, it's not worth my time, and that's okay. But generally we're looking for you know, a very common trigger is like if your HVAC system has been updated, that's like a very common trigger. If your envelope has been changed significantly, that's a very common trigger for reporting. And it's definitely something where I encourage posting about that to the 2030 peer-to-peer Basecamp network to understand how other firms have made that decision for themselves, because again, it's a very common decision. Or reaching out to staff at 2030 commitment at AIA.org, and we're glad to sort of talk through specific use cases and instances.
Great, so we have a clarification about the difference between the old DDX and the new DDX. The old DDX had one account per firm, but can you confirm that now every PA or collaborator in the firm needs to have their own account in the DDX?
We recommend that every individual at your firm who's contributing data has an account. You may approach that sort of and interpret that, whatever that means for you. Ultimately, we want the tool to work for you. But one of the things we hear or heard over and over again is that when you have one person who's responsible for entering all of the information, that becomes really tedious. It creates bottlenecks. It's not the most glorifying work. And so this is an opportunity to share that and make sure that you're sharing the overall performance of your entire company with all of the people who are affecting this project. So every individual within your organization can have an account. The administrator just needs to invite them. There's no limit on the number of accounts or emails that a firm can be associated with.
Great. Is it possible to export a project report from the DDX?
It is not currently possible to submit or to export just a single project. However, under the Manage Project tiles, you can export all of your projects into an XLS file. We have received in our first 2 webinars, actually, some really great suggestions on how to improve that export file. And so we are actively looking at those right now, and we'll be making improvements to that in the next couple of weeks. But you cannot export just a single project currently, but it's a great idea and one I'll take note of. Again, we really are interested in where there are things that we can do to make this tool more meaningful to you all in your practice.
Great. Is it possible to enter test projects into a database for the purpose of energy comparison?
Any project that you enter into the database will count toward your values by default. However, if you wanted to create a project, you could create a comparison project that's like an alternate scenario, and then tag that project as either canceled or on hold, or you could enter it and then always delete it. But within a single project record, so if I go into this Dobson project I made today, if I go into this project, it's not possible for me to create 2 scenarios, one which has, you know, one envelope system and track another that has another envelope system. But you could create a similar record and just mark it as on hold or canceled. You just want to make sure that you're not including it in your count.
Great. So we have a participant who almost all of their projects are mixed use. How should they define use type for their mixed use buildings?
So you can select multiple use types. So I'm going to go in and edit the use types on this Dobson project. So I entered an office type. I'm going to go ahead and say that there is, I don't know, maybe a fast food piece in the bottom floor, and maybe there's a bank in it. I don't know. This is becoming a very motley building. And it's going to go ahead and pull all of that information in to come up with your total square footage and to calculate your baseline. It's a weighted baseline. So this 10,000 square feet of office space is going to end up driving the overall baseline lower, despite this 2,500 square feet, which is a fairly high baseline for fast food. And that's going to calculate automatically into here. In terms of comparability, like what do we then use within the DDX to for this, like how you compare chart, for example? This chart, this single chart, is comparing based on your dominant use type. So in this instance, it's pulling from the 10,000 square feet that is mixed use office, which is a bit of a peccadillo, but it's something that then you can explain and say, well, this is a mixed use building, so it has a sort of more complicated EUI because we have a first floor use type that's driving the baseline up, and overall we're still performing well. But you can add an unlimited number of use types. One note is that parking cannot be your dominant use type, but any other use type can be. So if you have mixed use, that's how you would log it. You would add individual use types.
Great, we have a first-time viewer, so welcome, Rex. But could the DDX be used to manage a portfolio of both new and existing buildings by an owner? And a follow-up question, whether the DDX is free or if there is a fee to use it.
Awesome. Well, welcome, one. Two, ostensibly, yes. You would need to create a project that's marked as complete in order to be able to track that operational energy, which ostensibly is what an owner would want to see. Because at that point, once the building's in use, you're probably less interested in what was intended and more interested in what's happening. But you could do that and then be able to view it. Number two is the tool is completely free. You know, AIA recognizes that transforming our practice and achieving sort of the large-scale climate action and working toward carbon neutral and all the sort of priorities of this program require tools, resources, and community to make that happen. And so the 2030 commitment is now more than 750 companies strong. We have mostly architecture firms, but also a handful of engineering firms, a couple of owners, a lot of people who are saying this is important and we want to collectively move that needle. And so we want to make sure that you have the tools and the resources to do that, to track that, and to be using some consistent methodology to demonstrate our collective impact. So not only is this tool free for all users, we also offer the first course in a 10-course series called AIA Plus 2030 on AIAU, which is our online learning platform, for free to signatories. And we offer an additional discount on the remainder of the series, because again, we want to make sure that you have the tools and the resources and the knowledge to really succeed. So completely free. One note though on that, I'm going to put my own little caveat. While this tool is completely free and while energy modeling is not required for your projects, in order to demonstrate that your project is achieving the targets, you either need your fuel sources or the project to be energy modeled. And so there may be additional costs associated with that are outside of this system. But this platform, this benchmarking tool is completely free, as is that first AIAU course.
Great. Does the DDX indicate which items are required to submit and which are optional?
Yes. So when you're setting up your project, if we go back into project basic information, for example, required fields are marked with an asterisk. I'm going to cancel out of that. And then when you look at the design phase data, you'll recall that that very first design phase I added, I selected no to all of these. All of it is technically optional. Except for the reporting phase and the reporting date, because it is totally permissible, in fact expected, that you're going to have projects that you haven't energy modeled or that may be, you know, lower performers, and that's fine. So all mandatory fields are marked with an asterisk, and if you try to proceed without them, you will get a flag.
Great. And so we have a question on submitting. So does submitting a year only bring in active projects? What if a project was completed in early 2020? Should we wait to mark it as complete until after we submit?
The business rules for the submission function are any project that is active or project that has been completed in the last year. So a project that is marked complete in early 2020 should count toward your report.
Great. We do have a question about accessing the 2030 Basecamp page to post your questions. And if you email 2030commitment@aia.org asking us to join, we can add you to that. There's another question on bulk uploads and using the spreadsheet, where would people find that updated spreadsheet and guidelines for bulk upload?
So in the company section, which is where you go to do the bulk import, under manage projects, there is an import button. If you click on that, the sample CSV is available under the template. When you click on that link, it will download the CSV. You will want to download the new CSV. It's largely similar, but it's best practice every year, even with the old DDX, to download the new version. The help page or the guidance for the document is within the help pages, although we can see about adding a link here directly as well. That seems like maybe it's doable, but it's in the help pages, which is visible in the upper navigation the entire time with a question mark. And then there's a search bar. I'll show it. There's a search bar where you can enter like bulk import. And it's going to pull up relevant searches. Again, we're going to have updated guidance coming in for the bulk import soon, so you'll see it there. But also we can be sure to follow up with whoever asked the question when that guidance is ready. But yeah, the help pages are great. And just a note about the help pages, there are throughout a number of videos and like step-by-step walkthroughs to also help you with some of the more specific pieces of getting oriented to the new tool. Again, we know that there's a bit of a learning curve.
Okay, and maybe we have a question for one, maybe two more questions. We have time for one, maybe two more questions. Will there be a metric converter tool on the DDX for international projects or others than like international projects or others that aren't in the US?
Yes, great question. So going back to that Dobson project, when you set up your project, you are picking your measurement unit as either imperial or metric. And so if you were to select SI, it's best to set this at the beginning of the project and not change it, but we understand that that happens. And so if you switch unit, it'll be scaled to the new equivalent, but it will have things display. So for example, all of the units, instead of saying square feet, will show in square meters. And then when you download your projects, when you export them from the Manage Projects tile and you select Export, you're also asked whether you want your values to be populated metric or imperial, and they will scale appropriately. So yes, you can mix and match. And again, the intention there is to make it easier than ever to submit your projects and to reduce the amount of calculations you have to do.
Great. Well, we're just about at time, but like we said, we will get to your questions, so don't worry about that. We have a couple questions around posting the recording, so we will post it on the Basecamp. There's already a recording there and the PowerPoint slides, and we'll also post it to the 2030 Commitment YouTube page, and that'll all happen by next week. So you all can share that with all your colleagues and anybody else who's interested in the 2030 Commitment. If you have any other questions at all, feel free to email us at 2030commitment@ai.org, as well as if you want to join the peer-to-peer Basecamp. Thanks, Matt, so much for walking us through the DDX and answering all the wonderful questions.
Yeah, thanks, Bella, and thanks everybody for joining us today and for your questions and for your continued engagement in the 2030 Commitment. We're making some real gains, and it's great to see, and it's a testament to you all. So thank you again. Bye.
Bye.